Okay, thank you for that introduction. I am Rhonda Patrick. I work with Bruce Ames at Children's Hospital Oakland Research Institute. And I am going to talk to you about how your diet and lifestyle can regulate the aging process because let's face it, we're all aging and we'd all like to do it better. So, obesity is on the rise. It's growing by 50% per decade. Childhood obesity is growing by 50% per decade. And that's probably because we're eating a terrible diet. This is what I like to call the obesogenic diet. This family here laid out all the food that they're going to eat for the upcoming week. And as you can see here, there's very to little, no fruits, vegetables, which contain very important micronutrients, which Bruce is going to talk about. And it's highly processed food, packaged food, food that doesn't have essential vitamins and minerals and things that you need to feed your cells. So I've been doing some research on obesity and cancer. I think most people know that obesity can increase the risk of cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, but I don't think people are as familiar with the fact that obesity also increases the risk for cancer, neurodegenerative disease, and it also is associated with 7 years off your lifespan. In extreme cases, extreme obesity, when you compare to a lean person, it can take as much as 14 years off of a lifespan. So it's very significant. So I've been looking at the role of some biomarkers for cancer, such as DNA damage. And DNA damage, actually, this is your DNA molecule. There's a double-stranded break in that molecule. Well, just normal living causes DNA damage. So when we eat food and breathe in oxygen, we make, through this process of cellular respiration, we make energy for our cells. Well, that process makes something called reactive oxygen species that damage our cells. They damage the proteins in our cells, the lipids in our cells, and they damage the DNA in our cells. And this DNA damage can essentially, I can measure it by this signaling molecule here in people in their white blood cells. And so when I look at an antibody against this signaling molecule, which indicates DNA damage in people, what I see is that people with a BMI of 28 or above, so that's considered obese, have much, much higher levels of these double-stranded breaks in their DNA compared to people that are lean, people that have a BMI of 25 or below. So the question is why? Why do obese people have higher levels of the DNA damage in their blood cells? And I'm trying to figure out why. I think one reason is they're producing more of these reactive oxygen species, but also when you have DNA damage, you can actually repair that damage. You have DNA repair enzymes in your body that can repair that damage, and that will lead to a healthy cell. But if those DNA repair enzymes aren't working properly, that can lead to mutations that can lead to a precancerous cell, and over the years of accumulating these mutations, eventually can lead to full-blown cancer. So DNA damage is a well-known cancer initiator. Also, there's protective mechanisms in your body that say, when I get this DNA damage, this double-stranded break, which occurs from just normal metabolism, and also from things like UVB radiation, smoking, things like that are more obvious, your cell will say, well, I don't want this to cause a mutation, so I'm going to die. So it sacrifices itself and it kills itself to make sure that it doesn't cause a mutation. But if that process isn't working properly, it can also lead to mutations. And what's really interesting is that this DNA repair process requires magnesium. These enzymes require magnesium to work properly. And unfortunately, 45% of the population doesn't get adequate levels of magnesium. That's almost half the country. Magnesium's at the center of a chlorophyll molecule, so you can find it in green plants. Spinach and kale are great sources of magnesium. Right now, the RDA for magnesium is around 400 milligrams a day. And just to give you an example, 1 cup of cooked spinach is about 200 milligrams. So that's half the RDA. People aren't eating their spinach. People aren't eating their kale, unfortunately. They're not getting their magnesium. But this is the difference between insidious damage and a clinical symptom. So insidious damage is DNA damage. When you wake up in the morning and you look in the mirror, you can say, oh my God, my gums look like they're falling out. I must have scurvy. I probably should eat an orange. But you can't look in the mirror and see DNA damage. You can't see double-stranded breaks in your DNA occurring. This is an insidious type of damage that's happening every day, and it's accumulating over the years till eventually causes age-related diseases like cancer. My solution is my micronutrient smoothie. This is me happily making my morning smoothie that I make every day, which consists of kale, chard, and spinach, which is my source of magnesium, vitamin K, calcium, as well as vitamin C. I've got carrots and a tomato, which give me carotenoids, beta carotene, provitamin A. Avocado, which is potassium. It has all the vitamin E, tocotrienols, and the tocopherols. Banana, apple, and a cup of mixed berries because I want it to taste good also, since I'm eating it every day. And some unsweetened almond milk, and that's my breakfast. So not only does a bad diet affect the way you age in terms of obesity, type 2 diabetes, etc., but it can also affect the way your children and grandchildren age through epigenetics. So epigenetics refers to changes in gene expression without actually altering the DNA nucleotide sequence. So we can actually measure changes in gene expression in the lab. When a gene is turned on, it's active, it's doing what it's supposed to do. Those are indicated in red. When a gene is turned off, it's still there, but it's not active. It's not doing what it's supposed to do. It's almost as if it wasn't there. Those are indicated in green. And epigenetics are these little molecules like methylation and acetylation groups. They sit on top of your DNA and they turn genes on and they turn genes off. And here's the real kicker. These little marks, these epigenetic marks, they're regulated by your diet, by what micronutrients you're eating. They're regulated by how much exercise you're doing, by how much stress you're under, by how much sleep you get. So these things are changing your gene expression, and they can hitchhike on to the sperm and egg DNA and be passed on to your children and grandchildren. So an example, this study was published in Nature a few years ago. Researchers fed mice a high-fat diet that consisted of corn oil. So it was high-fat, high-inflammatory diet. Well, the male mice became obese and got type 2 diabetes. Big surprise. The surprise was that they had female offspring that were fed a normal diet, and the female offspring were lean, but also got type 2 diabetes later in life. And the reason for that is because the high-fat diet changed the expression of genes that are involved in secretion of insulin. And that was changed in the sperm DNA of the father mouse, and it was passed on to the female offspring. But your bad genes you don't have to, it's not your destiny. You can change your gene expression through your diet, through your lifestyle. And a classic example of that was done at Duke University. This was published a few years ago. These yellow mice have a gene called the agouti gene, which gives them this pretty yellow fur. However, this pretty yellow fur, that gene that encodes for that, also predisposes them to obesity, cancer, and type 2 diabetes. So it's really not a great gene to have. So what researchers did was they took female mice with this gene and they fed them a diet high in B vitamins, folic acid, B12, 3 weeks before they were pregnant. And what happened was they had offspring that still had the agouti gene, but it was silenced by one of those epigenetic marks. And so these mice, even though they had that bad gene, it wasn't being expressed. So they no longer had yellow fur. They no longer were predisposed to cancer or type 2 diabetes. So your diet can actually do good things for your gene expression. Even something as complex as learning and memory can be regulated by your environment. So this study was published in the Journal of Neuroscience a few years ago, where researchers took mice that were genetically engineered to get neurodegenerative disease. And they put these mice in an enriched environment. An enriched environment consisted of all these toys, sort of like exercise toys, that stimulated various regions of the brain, the visual, motor, somatosensory regions of the brain. And what they found was that these mice, even though they're genetically engineered to get a dementia type of neurodegenerative disease, they scored better on learning and memory tests. And they found the reason for that is because the exercise and the stimulating the different regions of the brain increase the expression of genes involved in long-term potentiation. That's what happens between the synapses that occur between two neurons when you're forming a memory during the learning process. What's really fascinating about this study was that those mice had offspring that were also genetically engineered to get neurodegenerative disease, but were not put in an enriched environment. They were put in a normal cage with some food and bedding, no toys, no stimulating the brain, but they still also increased the expression of long-term potentiation genes because it was epigenetically passed on through the sperm and egg DNA to the offspring. So I'm going to shift gears now and talk a little bit about vitamin D and some of my recent publications in vitamin D. 70% of the US population does not have adequate levels of vitamin D. That's over half the country. I mean, that's crazy. You'd think, well, something that's so easy to make from the sun, people surely would, be getting enough of it. Well, they're not. And the reason for that is because there's a variety of different factors that regulates the ability of your body to produce vitamin D. Sunscreen and skin pigmentation, melanin, which is the dark skin pigmentation that protects from the UV burning rays. Well, because in order for your skin to make vitamin D, it requires UVB radiation from the sun to hit your skin. And this induces the conversion of something called 7-dehydrocholesterol into the pre-vitamin D. Well, things that block UVB also block the ability of your skin to produce it from the sun. So if you're wearing sunscreen or if you have darker melanin content, then you're more likely to not be able to make as much vitamin D from the sun. In addition, body fat regulates the bioavailability of vitamin D. So vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. It's stored in the body fat. The more body fat you have, the less vitamin D is bioavailable to be released into the bloodstream, where then it's activated by the kidney and also the liver to an active steroid hormone. So the more body fat you have, the less vitamin D is bioavailable. Also age. So aging decreases the efficiency of your skin to make vitamin D. So a 70-year-old makes 4 times less vitamin D than their 20-year-old former self. So that's something also to keep in mind. Also latitude, where you live. So living in a northern latitude, places like 37 degrees above the equator, 7 months out of the year, UVB is not hitting the surface. So these people are not making vitamin D for a good portion of the year. And that's also another reason why a lot of people are deficient in vitamin D. And then again, we also have people that are like me and in the lab or at their computers all the time. I'm always wearing sunscreen because I'm worried about skin aging. I'm worried about DNA damage because DNA damage also occurs when you have UVB radiation. So I think this is most probably why so many people are deficient in vitamin D. How do you know if you are? Well, there's a simple blood test you can ask your doctor to do. It's easy, it's cheap, and it quantitates. It gives you a definitive, level of your vitamin D. So the Endocrine Society, the National Endocrine Society, has established that people that have serum levels of 25-hydroxyvitamin D, which is the precursor of vitamin D, less than 20 nanograms per mil are considered deficient. If you have less than 30 nanograms per mil, that's considered inadequate. And if you have between 30 and 60 nanograms per mil, that's considered adequate. So how do you get your vitamin D? Well, I say the simple solution is a supplement. You can find vitamin D in fish. Fatty fish also have vitamin D, but if you're severely deficient in vitamin D, 500 IUs a day only raises your serum levels by 5 nanograms per mil. So if you have someone that's 20 nanograms per mil and they're only taking 500 IUs a day, they're only going to get up to 25 nanograms per mil, which is still inadequate. So really, other studies have shown people that are severely deficient in vitamin D that take 4,000 IUs a day, which is actually the upper tolerable intake set by the Institute of Medicine. They're able to now take their levels from deficiency to adequate. So they're now can be 30 nanograms per mil. I personally take 4,000 IUs a day, and my levels range between 50 to 54 nanograms per mil, which is considered adequate. So vitamin D gets converted into a steroid hormone, a hormone that regulates the expression of over 1,000 different genes in your body. That's 1,000 different physiological processes in your body being regulated by this steroid hormone vitamin D, which 70% of the population is deficient in. So I recently published a paper in FASB Journal last February where I found that vitamin D increases the expression of a gene called tryptophan hydroxylase 2 in your brain. And this gene is responsible for the conversion of tryptophan into serotonin, that neurotransmitter. Very, very important neurotransmitter that's regulating a whole host of cognitive function and behaviors, including social behavior, emotion, aggression, anxiety, cognition, memory, appetite. These are all being regulated by serotonin. And in my recent publication, I also related this to autism because serotonin during early brain development is a brain morphogen. That means it's controlling the structure and the wiring of the developing brain. So when you don't have enough serotonin in the developing fetal brain, the structure and the wiring is abnormal, and that can affect the outcome and how the brain's wired and the connections and things like that. So I recently published that in FASB Journal if you're interested in that study. Serotonin also regulates pro-social behavior. I'm getting ready to submit another paper next week or in the next 2 weeks on how social behavior, so serotonin regulates executive function, things like learning, memory tasks, decision making. It regulates behavior, pro-social behavior. It regulates impulsivity, so it prevents you from being too impulsive. And it also regulates aggression, impulse aggression. And these things are all common. They've been found to be common in mental health disorders like schizophrenia, ADHD, bipolar disorder, things like that. Researchers have found that when you can actually deplete a normal person of their serotonin, and these people become more impulsive, their long-term decision making gets shut down, and they've shown the opposite, where you can flood someone with serotonin in their brain and it makes them more adverse to harming people, which kind of raises a very interesting question on whether or not serotonin plays a role in morality, but I'll save that for the philosophers. Vitamin D also regulates the aging process. These mice are the same age. The mouse on the left has been vitamin D deficient throughout its life. It's 4.5 months old here. The mouse on the right has normal vitamin D levels. These are the same mice 4 months later. Look how much older and how much faster the vitamin D deficient mouse has aged. I mean, vitamin D is controlling 1,000 different genes. Of course it's regulating the aging process. So how is it regulating the aging process? Well, one of the ways is through telomeres. Telomeres are tiny caps at the end of your chromosomes that are protecting your DNA from DNA damage. They're protecting your DNA from unwinding. And they're a biomarker for aging. So every cell in your body has your chromosomes. And when your cell divides, every year your telomeres get shorter and shorter and shorter. So eventually there's no telomeres left. And when that happens, your cell doesn't know what to do, so it goes into like a permanent state of retirement. So it just stops doing what it usually does, or it just dies. And so this is terrible when you're talking about stem cells, because when their telomeres get shortened, then you don't have any stem cells left to replete the populations of other tissues in your body. So telomere length is a biomarker for aging. The older you are, the shorter your telomeres are. The younger you are, the longer your telomeres are. Well, it's been found in twins that those twins with the highest levels of vitamin D have the longest telomeres compared to those twins with the lowest levels of vitamin D. In fact, those levels corresponded to 5 years of biological aging. So even though they were the same chronological age, those twins that had the lowest levels of vitamin D, their cells looked 5 years older. And that's because DNA damage and inflammation both accelerate the shortening of telomeres. Well, vitamin D increases the expression of DNA repair genes to repair that DNA damage, and it also decreases the expression of pro-inflammatory cytokines. So vitamin D is regulating the aging process. Meditation has also been shown to regulate telomere length. It's been shown that meditation, meaning not being so stressed, taking some time to be mindful, has been able to increase the expression of a gene that encodes an enzyme called telomerase. And this enzyme is able to rebuild your lost telomeres that you've lost with age. So those Buddhist monks may have known something that they didn't quite understand the mechanism by which we're just now beginning to figure out. Exercise also regulates telomere length. So in twins, those that are the most physically active have the longest telomeres compared to those that are the most sedentary. And that corresponded to 10 years of aging. So get your exercise. And really, this raises the question that there may be a difference between chronological age and biological age based on your diet and your lifestyle. You may have someone who looks biologically younger, even though their chronological age is older, and the opposite is also true. Sleep also regulates telomere length. People that sleep don't get enough sleep or have poor quality sleep have been shown to have shorter telomeres, which isn't a surprise because when you sleep is actually when you repair a lot of damage. DNA repair enzymes get activated at night, and also something called the glymphatic system gets activated when you're sleeping, and this is really cool. So when you sleep, you've got cerebral spinal fluid that squirts up from your spine all the way to your brain, and all these little microvessels here that are shown in blue, they're intercalating between your neurons and your glial cells in your brain, and they're physically squirting fluid and removing toxic buildup in your brain. It's been shown to also remove the toxic buildup of amyloid beta protein, which has been shown to play a role in Alzheimer's disease. So this is one of the mechanisms by which you could sleep actually helps you clear away toxic amyloid beta at night. Sleeping is important. Melatonin also plays an important role in repairing damage when you sleep. So melatonin is a hormone that's secreted from the pineal gland, which is a little endocrine gland that's close to your brain. It's actually separated by the blood-brain barrier, but it's a hormone that regulates the expression of 500 different genes. It increases the expression of antioxidant genes in the cortex and in the brain, and it's been shown to increase and regulate REM sleep. REM sleep is actually when you do a lot of this repair, a lot of the repair process happens during REM sleep. It's been shown that light inhibits the production of melatonin, particularly blue light, because it's more bright light. So you should try to avoid too much light at night. There's lots of different gadgets that can get rid of the blue light and only have an orange light around. But you can also just stick your head in the sand like this ostrich, probably save some money. But I want to leave you with these monkeys. These monkeys are the same age. The monkey on the left has ate as much as it wants throughout its entire 27.6 years of life. The monkey on the right has had 30% less food throughout its life. Look how much younger the monkey on the right looks. This monkey not only looks younger, it's less likely to have brain atrophy, it's less likely to get cancer, and it's less likely to have type 2 diabetes. So take a good look at these monkeys, and I want you to think about which monkey you want to be. And with that, I'd like to thank you for listening and thank my mentor, Bruce, and my students.